She sharply retorted to Mark that if he desired to feed the fish, then nobody was preventing him. However, Yu then conveyed some alarming details concerning the medical provisions, disclosing that only 3 rolls of bandages remain, a half-filled bottle of alcohol, and old Joe was in need of water when tending to his dressings and cleansing his wounds. Yet, Yu also indicated that the crucial aspect was their absence of any germ-killing medication. Old Joe then reassured Jang that he would be alright, as he was resilient and there was no need to squander resources on him. However, Mark offered a mocking remark about old Joe, implying that Joe had created a mess and now wished for them to rectify it for him. Hearing this, Jane became enraged and slammed the table forcefully. He inquired if Mark had quite enough of his garbage talk, admonishing him that should he continue to speak nonsense, he ought to believe that he would be ejected from the room. Fuming, Mark questioned whether he had uttered something incorrect, highlighting the scarcity of provisions and water for them. He questioned why they had to ponder departing when they were in a fairly secure state. Mark also contended that should they venture further, they would have to assist someone with a disability, wondering whether Jang intended to send them to their demise. Before John could retort again, Xiao yelled, asking them to cease fighting. She proposed that in lieu of quarreling, they ought to focus on discovering methods to resolve the pressing issue. She then suggested that they should not partition the food and water into identical portions, proposing that the younger people, such as themselves, could withstand a bit more. She also cautioned Master Joe that he needed to prevent dampness from reaching his wounds to avert infection. She also conveyed to Joe that should he need to clean the injury, he should simply employ the unboiled fluid from the kettle. Old Joe responded that he had no qualms about that, as he wouldn't place a burden on all of them. Xiao then shared with everyone that they needed to curtail activities that demanded considerable movement to diminish sweating and fluid loss. Zeng also concurred, emphasizing that everyone would have to endure a bit since they had to survive until the rescue team arrived. Yet, Yu then summarized that they adhered to Zhao's advice and allocated the food and water accordingly. However, as each day passed, the sustenance slowly dwindled. He also revealed that everyone was concentrating on the window outside, hoping to perceive the sound of aid arriving. However, by the window, there were only pathetic cries of the survivors. Until the 6th day, there was no sound, not even a person shouting or lamentations coming from the window. The scene then transitioned to 6 days later, where old Joe was in a terrible state. Lying on the bed, Yechu inquired of Zhang about old Joe's condition. Zhang responded that Joe's state wasn't promising, as his wounds were infected and his fever hadn't lessened. Zhang then asked Xiao how much food and water remained. She sadly answered that there was still some food left, but the water might only endure until the subsequent day. At that moment, Yeta picked up his water flask and noticed that only a minuscule amount of fluid remained. He reached to consume it, but for some unknown reason, he paused. Yeta then extended the water to Xiao, proposing that she should drink up since she hadn't had any water all day. Xiao responded with a denial, insisting that there was no need for her to consume any water, and they would do better to conserve it for old Joe. Suddenly, Jung heard something and asked both of them to stop conversing. After paying careful attention, Jung surprisingly exclaimed, "It's the sound of a helicopter." Zhang stood up and went towards the window to verify. Upon seeing the helicopters, he felt joyful. Jing then instructed everyone to rapidly fasten their footwear and gather their belongings, as they needed to swiftly ascend to the rooftop. Mark was sitting quietly. Observing this, Jing shouted at him and instructed him to assist in packing. Jing then requested Yetu to accompany him, as they would aid old Joe together. So they entered the room to carry old Joe. At that moment, outside, Xiao was packing up, but Mark shoved her aside and dashed towards the outside of the room to reach the rooftop alone. Witnessing him fleeing, Xiao anxiously urged him not to run and to be careful, as there might be mutated fish on the stairway. But Mark paid no attention to her and sped away. When Jing and Yetu returned with old Joe, Xiao disclosed that the rascal had run off by himself. On the other end, the captain of the helicopter unit, named Raka, announced for the other helicopters to maintain formation, as they were still 25 kilometers distant from their assigned location. On a helicopter, a soldier named Chong, when he glanced down, also became surprised, as the location seemed to be in the middle of an apocalypse. Suddenly, he noticed an individual soliciting assistance from the rooftop of a structure. Chong instructed the pilot to reduce the altitude, as there was a survivor on the rooftop. The pilot tensely responded that they had not received any orders to rescue survivors. Chung insisted that the helicopters could still accommodate some more individuals, so they should take the survivor in first. Unwillingly, they lowered the helicopter, and Mark dashed towards it. With the aid of the military, he was able to get inside. Chung inquired whether there were any more individuals in the dwelling, because if not, they needed to accelerate and depart. Hearing this, Mark became anxious and responded that there was no one remaining, and he was the sole survivor, so they should hasten and depart. So Chung asked the pilot to promptly increase the elevation and follow the other troops. By that time, others also reached the rooftop, and yet Chu shouted for them to cease and not leave, as they were still there. Hearing this, when Chong looked downward, he was taken aback to see them. To his even greater astonishment, he discovered Master Chong among them. Chong then furiously questioned Mark why he had just stated there was no one remaining. Mark became uneasy and responded that he didn't know about them because he was unacquainted with them. Suddenly, they received orders that their mission was their top priority, so the captain instructed them to resume formation. The pilot also requested Chung to consider, as they needed to continue with the others. Chung was still worried about Master Chung, so he threw his bag of provisions towards Chung and the others. Observing this, the other troops were shocked and asked what Chung had done, as those were their military provisions. Chung responded that he tossed the supplies bag because it would assist Jiang and the others to survive for a few more days. On the other side, seeing the supplies bag, Yeta shouted that they didn't desire anything. They simply needed to be rescued, so they should be transported in the helicopter with Jung and the others. To their surprise, all the helicopters advanced. Inside the helicopter, a troop inquired of Chong whether he knew the individuals standing on the rooftop. Chong responded with an affirmation, explaining that the one who was carrying the injured old survivor was his former instructor. He continued his account, explaining that while he was in the Special Forces, he got to know Instructor Chong, and they experienced the military life together for 3 years. Half a year ago, when he was deployed to the central area, he last saw Instructor Zhang, as Zhang had already retired by that time. Zhang then confessed that he hadn't anticipated meeting Master Zhang again, and he hoped they could endure until the military completed their assignment and returned. Hearing this, Mark laughed and referred to old Zhang as an aged and confused individual. He even remarked to Zhang that Zhang must have suffered a lot, as that old man Zhang was ill-tempered and unreasonable. Upon hearing this, Zhang became incensed and placed his weapon to Mark's mouth. Startled, Mark asked what it was about. Chung responded that he had detected earlier that Mark was not a good person. In fear, Mark said that he thought he had a misunderstanding with Chang's instructor, Old Chung, so please put the gun down. Chong responded that he didn't care if Mark harbored grudges with his instructor, but if from the present time Mark dared to hinder their mission, then Mark would have to taste bullets. Mark responded with an okay. Then, they received another notification from their commander that they had reached the destination, so upon reaching the structures, they promptly needed to execute the operation. Everyone agreed with it. After some minutes, a helicopter named Alpha 3 shared that they had discovered a huge cluster of mutated fish, so they immediately initiated fire to eliminate them. Gradually, everyone acknowledged their command and commenced firing at the mutated fish to eradicate them. From the sound of bullets, Mark became terrified and covered his ears. After a few minutes, when the surroundings fell silent, he uncovered his ears and eyes. At that time, Chong communicated to the other helicopters that it was Alpha 8 speaking, and they were en route ready for action. Seeing the helicopters landing on a rooftop and troops emerging from them, Mark confusingly inquired of Chong if they weren't at the safe house. Chong responded with an apology, admitting that he neglected to inform him that their mission wasn't to save survivors. They had a specific task, and picking him up was his own decision. Chong then bolted out of the chopper alongside others, informing Mark that from that instant onward, he'd have to fend for himself completely. The camera then panned to Jung and the rest, where Jung was visibly furious, yelling in exasperation. Zhang was denouncing Mark as a spineless individual, pondering how one could repay kindness with treachery and abandon their comrade in arms, questioning if such a person could even be deemed a man. He even berated the government for the blatant falsehood that aid was incoming. Observing Master Zhang in such a state of agitation, Xiao expressed her view that the military had to prioritize their assignment initially, and they were in a rush, lacking the time to bring them aboard just yet. Chu also concurred with Xiao, believing that rescue support was right behind them, and the military had already furnished them with supplies. Chu then inquired as to why they'd provide them with supplies, if they didn't intend for them to last a few extra days. Zeng apologized to the group for losing her self-control, then sharing that she knew Master Zhang must be weary, so he should rest momentarily, and she would take care of the preparations. Yet Zhang was still deeply dejected. Yet still, they encouraged him to remain positive, as he figured that Zhao's words held merit. Jing then voiced that he'd be direct, given the circumstances. There wasn't a possibility of rescue. Hearing this, they shockingly asked why. Zhang then revealed that he recognized the chopper's designation. It belonged to a base within the city, indicating that the calamity had struck not just Wuquan City, but also those municipalities near the coastline. And during times like this, those to be saved would be the top brass, whereas they were merely ordinary people. Zhang then alerted them that they had to brace themselves mentally. If they wished to survive, they could only rely on themselves. Subsequently, Yung queried Xiao about any useful items. Xiao replied that there were some first aid provisions, canned edibles, and some packages of wafers, but no water containers. She also pointed out that there were some military resources and produced a field glass, while Yechu was inspecting the binoculars. Xiao exclaimed in shock and brought out a handgun, requesting them to take a peek at it. Xiao then requested Master Yang to examine the weapon. After carefully scrutinizing it, Yang announced that it was a Beretta 92 pistol. Yang speculated that there could be further things, so he asked Xiao to hand him the bag, as he desired to see what else could be utilized. After checking, they discovered many items inside. Following this, Yang conveyed that they now had a multitude of things for self-preservation, but the issue was their shortage of water, sustenance, and medicinal supplies. Xiao also mentioned that they only possessed 2 water flasks. Upon hearing this, Zhong became anxious and wondered out loud that they couldn't even dare ingest water from the exterior. Aside from the menace of mutated aquatic life, they didn't know whether the water was safe for consumption in the first place. Zhang then made everyone aware that they needed to contemplate finding water through other means. He grabbed the field glass and peered outside from the opening. Yechu then asked Zhang if he had detected anything. Zhang then passed the field glass to Yechu and asked him to take a gander at the opposite side of the street. When Yechu looked through the binoculars, he spotted a food market and a chemist shop at the junction. He then questioned Zhang if he was alluding to those locations. Zhang responded affirmatively, explaining that as the main entrance was bolted shut, it signified that the supplies inside hadn't been plundered. Following the disaster, upon hearing Zhang's explanation, Yichu anxiously asked if Zhang was thinking of obtaining medicine and water from the shops across the way. Zhang responded positively, explaining it was the most optimal approach he could conceive. Afterward, Zhang retrieved a piece of paper and commenced drafting a map of their surroundings. He asked Xiao and Yetu to scrutinize the map, highlighting that the chemist and food store on the avenue were their sole avenue for procuring clean water and medical provisions. He also indicated that there was one block separating them from the stores. Yetu voiced his apprehension, stating that he reckoned reaching there wouldn't be straightforward. Zheng responded affirmatively, acknowledging the difficulty, but he reassured them that they had 2 strategies for completing the mission. Jane then described the initial strategy, which consisted of traversing the blocks using wooden boards one stride at a time. They would then gain entry into the store by descending from the 2nd level. After making it to the rooftop, Shio replied, pointing out the issue with the first plan, as they didn't know the spacing between the blocks, and they were unclear on how to reach the rooftop. Zhang acknowledged Zhao's worries and explained that there was a secondary choice available as well. Jung shared that the second option was to use the in-case cable lines on the upper level to ascend there and gain entry through the opening. However, he cautioned that it was near the water and incredibly perilous. At this current moment, he couldn't conjure up any further thoughts for reaching the stores, since these were the only tactics that held any promise. Xiao then carefully studied the layout and contemplated briefly. With a flash of excitement, she revealed that she believed if they made an attempt during the dark hours, the second approach might be feasible. Upon hearing this, both Zhang and Yichu were taken aback and inquired what Xiao was referring to, explaining that she wasn't certain if either of them had taken notice. But during the past several days, altered fish had been producing a great deal of commotion during the daylight, but were hushed at night. It appeared the altered fish were slumbering during the nighttime, so provided they didn't make contact with the water's surface, they wouldn't pose a threat to individuals who were out of their reach. Yet you nervously voiced the concern that they had encountered other varieties of altered fish during the night. Xiao replied that she had also observed that, and based upon their prior skirmishes, the night-dwelling altered fish didn't seem to possess vision, so if they could evade the altered fish, they wouldn't be an issue whatsoever. Zeng concurred with Xiao, acknowledging that her hypothesis could certainly be conceivable. He then conveyed to the two of them that he would climb up the cables, while they both remained within the room. To keep watch, however, Yechu exclaimed a firm no, which left both Xiao and Zhang perplexed. As they stared at Yechu in puzzlement, Yechu requested Master Zhang to allow him to take the lead this time, since Zhang had always been looking out for them. Yechu wanted the opportunity to bear some responsibility and fulfill his share of the task. Zhang tried to object, but Yechu interrupted him, adding that climbing those lines would necessitate someone of lighter build. Upon hearing this, Xiao also sided with Yechu, realizing that weight was indeed a vital element they had disregarded. Zhang then considered it for a moment, and ultimately consented to proceed the way they both were suggesting. The scene then transitioned to nighttime, where Yechu was equipping himself with his supplies. Having completed his preparation, he informed everyone it was time to depart. He possessed a secured rope with him, and John cautioned Yechu that if he encountered any difficulties, he should quickly tug on the cord, and John would immediately rush to his rescue. Xiao also passed something to him, mentioning that she had crafted a weapon for personal defense. She detailed that she employed metal thread to bind a metal pipe and a knife together, ensuring it was more resilient than the former one. Yi Chu then received the weapon and placed it inside his bag. Zhang also agreed with Xiao and instructed Yechu to make use of it. He reminded Yechu to recall how he taught him to operate, emphasizing not to squander ammunition when confronted with peril. Yechu responded with an okay and asked them to also be cautious. He reassured them that he would return without delay once he acquired water and medication. So after that, Jung carefully lowered Yechu toward the wire. For the plot twist, someone else was within the city observing Yechu through binoculars. After spotting Yechu, a girl shared with her companion that she hadn't anticipated anyone else surviving. However, she commented that those survivors were more chilling than the mutated fish. After landing securely on the cables, Yechu released a breath of relief. Jung also inquired whether the wires were stable. Yechu reassured him that the lines were fine, as they could support his weight, so Jung could let loose the rope. Now, after setting down, he stood up and examined the pathway. Realizing he was required to navigate over the water's expanse, he resolved to proceed carefully, taking things one step at a time. Yet you advance slowly, yet steadily. At one instance, a cable lock broke, causing him to nearly fall into the water due to the loosening grasp. However, he was able to cling onto the wire just in the nick of time. The fractured piece plunged into the water, startling Zeng and Xiao as they watched Yi Chu's precarious condition. Even Yi Chu sighed in relief, having escaped the danger. However, his relief was short-lived when he detected the sound of surging water, causing fear to overtake him as he wondered if it was the altered fish. His suspicions proved to be accurate, as the altered fish ascended from the water, launching toward him in an assault. Witnessing the spectacle, everyone grew tense, unsure of what measure to employ. To their amazement, the altered fish couldn't reach the elevation of the line and retreated back beneath the water. With a sigh of relief at having narrowly avoided a significant threat, Yechu resumed moving onward. As he advanced further, he came upon something that left him awestruck. Meanwhile, Zhang confided in Xiao that he could no longer perceive Yi Chu's advancement, speculating that Yi Chu should be reaching the third segment. However, Xiao urged Zhang to take another glimpse, pointing out that Yi Chu was signaling them with his flashlight. Upon noticing this, Zhang wondered if Yi Chu could be in danger. Once again, peering through the spectacles, he observed that the line had been snipped to a specific distance, preventing Yi Chu from reaching the third segment. Upon closer observation, Jung realized that this could only have been the deed of other people, leading him to wonder and be surprised if more survivors were in close proximity. Jan shared with Xiao that the situation had become extremely intricate, prompting them to signal Yechu to return. Xiao signaled Yechu to come back, and Yechu agreed, mentioning that he would attempt to return through the rooftop. As Yechu made his way back slowly, he glanced inside a window and was taken aback by what he saw inside. Yechu's shock transformed into curiosity as he saw a container of water with a tap inside the building. Xiao urged Jung to attend to Yechu's signals. Through the spectacles, Jiang observed that Yichu was communicating his wish to enter the central structure. Jiang pondered whether Yichu had discovered something advantageous. As he entered the room meanwhile, Yechu made his way into the room through the window, discovering it to be unoccupied. Unfazed, he advanced toward the container of water and filled his bottle, using the tap as Yechu filled his water bottle. A sound from inside the closet grabbed his notice. Curious, he opened the closet to investigate. However, his curiosity changed to apprehension and shock as he uncovered a cage containing a trapped, altered fish within. Startled by the sudden discovery of the altered fish in the enclosure, Yechu instinctively took a step backward. To his further astonishment, he felt something strange under his foot. Looking below, he was stunned to find the deceased form of a woman. Out of nowhere, a bald man called Henry emerged and reassured Yichu not to worry, explaining that the woman had disregarded his rules and had been deceased for many days. He confessed to getting rid of her, but disturbingly mentioned that using the flesh from the dead woman to lure the altered fish gave him pleasure. Upon hearing this, Yichu was both bewildered and horrified, inquiring of Henry if he truly eliminated the woman. Henry affirmed, clarifying that she had scaled the cables from the adjoining room and requested complimentary water, declining to barter with other items. She begged persistently, asserting her daughter was desperately in need of hydration. Yechu was deeply appalled to hear that the woman simply required water for her offspring, and Henry's actions stunned him. Henry replied, confessing he felt compassion for the woman's child, but regarded the scenario as unfortunate regardless. Henry's pronouncement sent a shiver down Yechu's backbone, as he likened those who appropriated items without payment to the mutated fish. Suddenly, Henry seized Yechu's neck forcefully, accusing him of intending to pilfer water like the woman. He proclaimed that Yechu had to perish as he would eliminate Yechu himself. Yechu promptly evaded Henry's assault by gripping his hand, entreating him to relax and emphasizing the necessity for collaboration to endure in such a predicament. However, Henry's retort was disquieting. He chuckled and demanded that Yetu surrender all his possessions, promising him a painless demise in exchange. Yetu retaliated fiercely, employing a rod as a weapon against Henry. Henry was caught off guard to see Yetu armed. Despite their struggle, Henry commented on Yechu's nimbleness and swiftness, implying that he had consumed nourishment in recent days. Henry's manner shifted to one of gratification, contemplating eliminating Yechu as a favorable outcome. In his haste, Yechu initiated an offensive on Henry, but Henry eluded it with a smirk, assured in his capacity to vanquish Yechu. However, destiny intervened as the mutated fish grasped Henry's hand, this time dragging him towards itself and biting his hand brutally. Henry's wails of anguish resounded in the chamber as he begged for Yechu's aid. Yechu swiftly retrieved the firearm and aimed it at the mutated fish. Henry, shocked by the sight of the gun, urged Yechu to discharge the weapon on the fish without hesitation. Henry's shouts grew increasingly frantic as he implored Yechu to fire the gun and not abandon him to his doom. Despite the urgency of the circumstance, Yechu hesitated, quivering with trepidation. Henry's voice reverberated anew, demanding to know what Yechu was anticipating, questioning if he desired Henry to be consumed alive by the mutated fish. Henry's affronts pierced deep as he labeled Yechu a scoundrel, accusing him of forsaking individuals to die and lamenting not disposing of him sooner. Overwhelmed by Henry's remarks and the intensity of the situation, Yechu's awareness faded away. In a haze, he discharged the weapon without aiming, yielding to the turmoil of the moment. Upon hearing the gunshot, Zhang and Xiao were gripped with dread. Jing, tense with anxiety, instructed Xiao to safeguard herself and Zhou as he hurried to locate Yichu. Using a rope, Jing descended swiftly on the cables. Meanwhile, near Yechu, it was apparent that Henry had been eliminated. Yechu was bewildered and pondered how it had transpired that way, as he had solely intended to rescue Henry. Abruptly, he detected a voice emanating from the window. Instinctively, he directed the gun towards it. But this time it was Jing, so he requested Yetu to compose himself. Jung then queried Yetu what had unfolded mere moments prior, why he had discharged the weapon and at whom. While inquiring, Zhang observed the environment and intensely questioned what had occurred with them. Yetu dejectedly replied that he had sought to acquire some water when he was assaulted by Henry, and Henry had even attacked the woman lying on the floor. Yet you further explained that during the altercation, Henry was bitten by the mutated fish in the cage, so he had wanted to deploy the firearm and to take down the fish and rescue Henry. But somehow, he mistakenly shot Henry instead of the fish. Zhang replied to Yetu, telling him not to stress as it wasn't his error. It was Henry's corrupted nature that had surfaced during the crisis. That was the reason. Zhang then implored Yetu not to feel guilty, as it wasn't the opportune moment for it. They needed to search the room for anything they could utilize. So, they carefully went deeper into the next room to secure some provisions. In the interim, the transformed fish, observing them moving away from the chamber, grasped the chance and gradually extracted the cage keys from Henry's pocket. Inside the room, Yetu discovered some comestibles in the cabinet and treats in a box. He informed Zhong that he'd located provisions and food items. Zhong also mentioned he had discovered many water bottles stored in the cupboard. Yetu also realized there were numerous water containers and inferred that they must have been plundered from others in the market during the emergency. Zhong then conveyed his suspicion that Henry had assaulted more than a single person. He also requested that Yetu not be excessively concerned about it and concentrate on gathering as much as feasible. In the meantime, Xiao was anxiously awaiting at the window for both Yetu and Zhang. Abruptly, to her astonishment, someone from above descended into her room directly using a rope. Taken aback, she attempted to yell for assistance, but before she could, the young woman covered Shu's mouth and assured her not to be fearful, clarifying that they simply desired to take shelter temporarily. Xiao, surprised, inquired who they were and if they were survivors like herself. The girl answered in the affirmative, explaining they were indeed survivors of the disaster. Suddenly, Xiao heard another voice proclaiming that they were finally protected, at least for the present time. When Xiao glanced, she saw it was a boy. The boy also mentioned that the mutated fish hadn't pursued them. Simultaneously, the scene returned to Zhang and Yetu, who were both carrying as much material as they could in their bags. Zhang then offered Yetu a water container to drink. As Yetu drank, he appeared extremely downcast. Observing this, Zhang inquired what was troubling him, wondering if he was still contemplating the recent occurrence. Yetu responded in the affirmative, expressing that even though that person deserved to perish, he had missed a shot and ended up shooting them instead, weighing heavily on his conscience. Zhang then shared with Yetu that he reminded him of a soldier he once mentored. Zhang then began narrating about a person named Chong. Chong was a new recruit in the Special Forces, struggling during drills and up until his initial mission, when he neutralized an adversary for the very first time. From that point onwards, he completely transformed into another person. Zheng also shared that he always found Zheng indulging in beer. He believed that when someone committed their first elimination, there would be an internal conflict in their heart, as the person they had killed might have been an enemy, or even a truly malicious individual. It was a question of esteeming life, but some of that esteem might progressively lessen under the stress of the catastrophe, which had him feeling uneasy. Zhang then asked Yetu to stop conversing as they needed to hurry back. As they were on the cusp of leaving, they unexpectedly detected something from the rear. When Yetu turned around, he was startled and acted strangely, running towards the storage unit to investigate. Seeing this, Zhang asked what was transpiring. Yetu replied that he believed the cabinet had been displaced by something. When Yetu peered behind the cupboard, he shockingly informed Zhang that there was something behind it. Curiously, they managed to relocate the cabinet somehow, and the moment they looked behind it, they were astounded to discover a large opening in the wall. When they glanced inside, they observed that cables had been employed to create a link connecting the two chambers. Seeing this, John declared that he thought it must have been executed by Henry. After Henry severed the cables outside, he must have utilized them to pilfer things from the adjacent chamber. Yetu also responded that was the reason. There was no need to question why Henry's room possessed such a surplus of groceries. Zhang was also surprised that the combat outside in the metropolis was beyond their expectations. Abruptly, Yechu recollected something and inquired of Zhang if the drugstore shouldn't be close to the chamber. When Yetu switched on the light to peer into the other chamber from the window, he was surprised to witness a young girl in the window. So Yetu wondered whether the girl was the child of the woman. Zeng agreed with Yetu, deeming it plausible that the girl was the daughter of the deceased woman. Jane then shared with Yetu that they had to save her, as they couldn't abandon the young girl alone in the chamber. So they carefully moved on the cables to reach the other side of the chamber. When they entered, they observed many medicines, including antiseptics and bandages. Just what they required. Suddenly, something fell to the floor, capturing Yetu's attention. But Zhang asked Yetu to disregard it, emphasizing that first they needed to locate the young girl. So they cautiously moved into another room adjacent to that one. They observed that the chamber had some medical equipment, and abruptly, Yechu heard a sound emanating from the cupboard. So Zeng directed Yechu to open the door from that side, while he stood on the opposing side. The instant Yechu opened the door, the young girl emerged with a knife and began brandishing it through the air. With her eyes closed, attempting to defend herself from them, she was yelling at them not to approach, accusing them of being wicked people. Without ceasing, she continued brandishing the knife, demanding that they keep their distance and depart. Jung and Yechu raised their hands and surrendered, trying to demonstrate they intended no harm. So the girl paused for a moment. Zhang then asked her to drop the knife, clarifying that they were not wicked individuals, despite what she might believe, and that they only needed some water and medication, and wouldn't hurt anyone. The young child began sobbing, so Yetu reassured her not to weep, reminding her that they had dealt with a malicious person. The young child's name was Lily. Lily then stumbled to the ground and began crying, asking why they didn't restore her mother to her. She continued pleading with them to somehow give her mother back. Hearing the sound, a mutated fish was moving slowly towards it. Even the mutated fish passed by the front of Zhao's chamber. So the boy in the chamber disclosed that there was still one fish below them. The girl saw Xiao looking so forlorn and exhausted, so she offered her some water, thinking Xiao must be parched. The boy shouted at the girl, inquiring what she was doing, as they didn't even possess sufficient water for themselves to consume. The girl shouted back at the boy, arguing that those people had brought them inside out of kindness, so giving one container of water as reimbursement wouldn't be excessive. Xiao spoke up, observing that, looking at them, they possessed such formidable weapons and gear, so they likely weren't from Wuquan. The girl then apologized for not introducing herself. Earlier, she introduced herself as Lu, a competitive archer. Lu also explained that when the catastrophe transpired, she was practicing in the archery field. She then introduced the boy as Li. He was a guard working at the archery range, and they escaped together after the entire pandemonium started. Li then produced a shotgun and shared that luckily he had taken it while fleeing, and it was an exceptionally useful instrument for dealing with the mutated fish. And individuals overhearing this, she inquired in disbelief, interacting with people. What do you imply? What's the current situation outside? Lu replied, it was in disarray, and humankind's battle for existence had barely commenced, and in time to come it could become considerably dire. Chao anxiously questioned if everyone had begun assailing one another. Li then questioned what they should be concerned about, declaring that if anyone attempted to pilfer from them, they would promptly eliminate them, similar to how they managed those foolish thugs. Hearing this, Xiao asked in astonishment if they had already executed 2 individuals. Liao hollered at Li, asking if he had lost his senses for mentioning that in the presence of a stranger. Li contended that there was nothing inappropriate in stating that, as those 2 ruffians had consistently taken advantage of him, and allowing them to perish was their deserved fate. Liao noticed that Xiao was growing anxious and uneasy, so she implored her not to fret, assuring her that it was in self-preservation and they did not attack innocent folks. Li also concurred, saying that what Sister Lu expressed was correct. But in circumstances like that, they didn't require to reason with unreasonable individuals. The single course of action was to employ every means available to safeguard themselves Hearing this, Xiao was frightened and questioned. Even in self-defense, why is it necessary to inflict harm upon others? Lu entreated Xiao not to misinterpret their motives, as they had no alternative. Observing this, Li instructed Lu to save her words, since there was no need to clarify things to Xiao, because Xiao would eventually encounter it firsthand down the line. He also advised Xiao not to dwell too much on them, since once the external monster departed, they too would leave and journey toward their intended location. He hoped that they would all reconnect without becoming adversaries. Abruptly, Li was taken aback and inquired what they ought to do about the beast advancing into the pharmacy block. Upon hearing this, Xiao was alarmed and urgently called out the names of Yi. Chu and old Zhang Liao was astounded to hear Xiao, and asked her if her two companions were located inside the pharmacy block. Xiao responded affirmatively and questioned how Liao had learned of it. Liao then stood up and grasped her bow. Noticing this, Xiao nervously questioned Liao about what was happening. Lu then asked Li if he believed they had gone to the pharmacy, because Xiao and her friends needed it. Li responded with a yes, given there was a high likelihood, since one of Zhao's allies was injured, but they would require it if they sought refuge in the supermarket. Lu conveyed that she desired no further conflicts to arise. Xiao was uneasy and uncertain on what course of action to pursue. The scene then transitioned to the other side inside the pharmacy block, where the mutated fish that was sightless had entered. Another mutated fish that could swim and perceive was also circulating. Even the more sizable mutated fish devoured the mutated fish that had vision. Meanwhile, in a separate chamber, Lily was consuming food incredibly swiftly, as if she had been devoid of nourishment until this point. So Zheng requested she eat with greater moderation and even offered her a water container. So Lily accepted the water container and commenced drinking it rapidly. Observing this, Zhang expressed that he imagined the kid must have been starving intensely. He then notified Yitu that while the girl was emotionally composed, to take the opportunity to handle all the medical necessities. So Yitu moved around and perceived that there were numerous empty containers on the table. He resolved to search for some disinfectant and bandages. Abruptly, he noticed a cupboard and opened it, but it still contained all the discarded objects. Luckily for Yetu, he located a first aid box in the bottom shelf of the cupboard. When he opened it, he was gratified to see so many usable articles. He also discovered a journal within the box. Meanwhile, on the other side, John was inquiring from Lily what had transpired in the past few days, and the whereabouts of everyone, but Lily offered no response. So John conveyed to her that he understood she was feeling despondent, but requested that she trust them as they were not malevolent individuals. They merely required some urgent provisions and water, which was the reason for their arrival. Abruptly, Yechu urged Master Zhang to observe the cupboard. Zhang rose and questioned Yechu about his findings. Yechu directed Zhang's attention to the diary. When Zhang glanced inside, he found instructions pertaining to the usage of the first aid kit. Yechu asserted that it was ideal as they required the entire bag. Zhang also experienced a sense of relief knowing that old Joe needed the medicine. Suddenly, to their astonishment, Lily snatched the diary from old Jenga's grasp. Lily then initiated shouting that they were all deceivers, given that they had just declared they only wanted water and medicine. She then stated that her mother had bestowed upon her the family's life accumulation items, and they also intended to seize those. Zhang then entreated Lily to pay attention to them, since they had an ally who was severely hurt, and his condition was precarious, and the bag held the potential to save his existence. But Lily became so overwhelmed with them and yelled that it was all fabrication, so she would not relinquish the bag to them. Jing then apologized, clarifying that they genuinely required the bag, and slowly initiated moving toward her to snatch the bag. Observing this, Yitu inquired Xiang about his actions, but before Xiang could respond, abruptly he was assaulted by the mutated fish from the rear, as Jung's face became encompassed by the fish's tentacle, and the fish dragged him back toward itself. At that instant, Lily and Yechu were paralyzed with shock and fear, not knowing what action to take in that predicament. The mutated fish persisted in pulling Zhong with relentless force, and he was dragged along the ground. Eventually, the fish's grip lessened, affording Zhong the opportunity to draw his firearm. Zhong then continued firing at the mutated fish's tentacle to liberate himself from its hold. Unexpectedly, he succeeded in destroying the fish's tentacle. However, as he endeavored to remove the lingering part of the fish's tentacle. The creature attempted to assault Zhang once again. This time, Yetu interceded and attacked the fish with an oxygen container. Yetu continued striking the fish, but it countered by hitting her with its tail, sending both Yetu and Zhang hurtling toward the wall. As the fish approached them once more, Yetu extracted her gun and commenced shooting. The mutated fish retreated to seek cover. Yetu then questioned Zhang about his well-being, to which Zhang responded in the affirmative, indicating that he was unharmed. Zhang was about to reach for his gun, but before he could, Lily manifested unexpectedly and grabbed the firearm from the floor. Jung was astonished to see her, and quickly cautioned her not to be imprudent. As the gun was loaded tensely, Jung informed Lily that they could engage in negotiations, but he requested her to return the firearm first. Lily retorted assertively, claiming that because they possessed firearms, they must be villains. Yet you rebuked Lily, reminding her of their precarious circumstances and advising against further provocation. Abruptly, though, you detected the fish drawing near once more and cautioned John to exercise caution. The fish lunged, but fortunately impacted a shelf nearby instead. Zhang and Yeto promptly utilized the shelf as a shield, sheltering themselves and the girl from the creature. As the fish crept closer, Lily grew anxious. Both Zhang and Yetu were unable to release their hands due to supporting the shelf. It appeared to be a desperate plight for Yetu and Zhang. Nonetheless, to their astonishment, Lily commenced firing at the fish, without even glancing in its direction. Yetu and Zhang also shut their eyes, fearing they might be struck by the stray bullets. When the sound of the shooting ceased, they cautiously opened their eyes and observed that the mutated fish was deceased. They moved away from the shelf, but Lily was still holding the gun, aiming at the mutated fish. Zhang approached her and asked her to regain her composure, assuring her that the fish was no longer a threat. He also attempted to reclaim the gun, explaining to Lily that it was unsafe for her to be armed with it. However, Lily quickly retracted her hand, trying to shield the weapon so that Jane couldn't seize it. Jane then informed Lily that they wouldn't pilfer her belongings anymore, so she should please return their firearm. Lily declared that they could take the first aid kit, but first they had to commit to something. On the flip side, it became apparent that a multitude of mutated fish were amassing toward the pharmacy building. Li noticed this and alerted Lu and Xiao that the commotion appeared to have drawn all the adjacent mutated fish. Hearing this, Xiao became anxious and started to fret about Yi Chu and Jiang. Li then proposed that they could use the rope's length to traverse the roofs. However, before moving ahead, he requested Xiao to establish terms, since he was entering the pharmacy building to retrieve what he required. Sire requested that they aid her companions, so if the pharmacy had a sufficient quantity of supplies, everyone could obtain whatever they desired. But if there was not ample to distribute, the items Yechu and John secured would be theirs, provided that both of them could escape unharmed. Xia concurred with this stipulation, as she was agreeable to all conditions, as long as both Yi Chu and Xiang returned unscathed. Lu then offered the bow to Li, suggesting that he bring it along, as it might assist him when necessary. However, Li turned it down, stating that he had no need for it. Furthermore, he highlighted the necessity to stabilize the situation at Zhao's place, emphasizing that their intentions had become known, and Xiao might no longer regard them as virtuous people. Lu concurred and reassured Li not to worry about them, underscoring the importance of returning without delay. After completing his task, Li replied with an okay, and subsequently headed towards the rooftop to make his way toward the pharmacy block. On the other hand, all the mutated fish commenced climbing into the pharmacy block, presenting a horrifying sight. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to Lily and the others, where Lily had already extracted a promise, and Jung and Yechu had agreed to it. Lily implores them to honor their commitment. Zhang reassures her not to fret, as they will certainly uphold their word. Lily, feeling anxious and desperate, inquires about when they can leave. Zhang explained that they couldn't depart immediately, as they needed to tend to their friend's injuries first. Once his condition was stable, he pledged they would fulfill their side of the bargain. Yi Chu then questioned Lily about the location of the people from the pharmacy block and whether there were any surviving individuals. Zhang also inquired about what had happened inside the pharmacy block. Lily replied that she wasn't really aware of what had occurred outside the building, but once the mutated fish appeared, she and her mother remained in their room, She also explained that her mother managed the pharmacy, so they resided there, and they were trapped inside when the deluge arrived, unable to go out. She mentioned that the building opposite housed the food emporium, and everyone, including her mother and herself, frequented it to procure food. She also shared that during the night, the mutated fish scaled the stairs and attacked humans upon sight. Her mother succeeded in barring the pharmacy door on the second floor, but the cries from outdoors persisted until the following morning. Zung then informed her that it was the same on their side, as his friends were assaulted by the mutated fish on the initial night and suffered injuries yet. You then inquired if Lily was acquainted with Henry, the hairless man on the next floor. Lily replied that Henry arrived via the cables on the third day, and they assumed he was trying to escape the mutated fish. However, they later discovered that Henry was actually a miscreant who attacked people. She also disclosed that Henry had harmed her mother and absconded with all their food and water. Lily continued to share that her mother was concerned that Henry would reappear, so she severed the cables outside the window to prevent him from finding a means back in and pilfering the remaining food and water. Lily recounted that after her mother cut the cables, she grew worried about starvation, so she went to plead with Henry for some sustenance. However, she never came back. Lily then started crying. Hearing Lily's story, Jang shared that during a catastrophe, morality often vanished, and the worst aspects of humanity were exposed. He asked Lily to cease crying, assuring her that Henry had already met his demise, and perhaps it was deserved. Lily, still weeping, asked why her mother hadn't returned. John, unsure of what to say, took a few moments to ponder before responding. He proposed that perhaps her mother had been rescued by a helicopter during the day, but was unable to take them due to time limitations. Observing everything transpire, yet you couldn't help but contemplate the bleak reality of their predicament. In such dreadful circumstances, they were compelled to resort to deceiving children to maintain their composure and to arm themselves to contend for survival. Yet, you mused about how long they could withstand the trials ahead, relying on their instinct to live and their aptitude to collaborate with others. Suddenly, the sound of shattering glass fractured the tense atmosphere, startling Lily. As Yechu and Jang turned toward the source of the noise, they were shocked to see numerous mutated fish converging toward them. Jang realized that the sound they had created previously had attracted all the mutated fish. Slowly, every mutated fish began advancing toward them, intent on attacking. However, they managed to defend themselves by shooting at the approaching fish with their gun. Lily shouted and urged Jang and Yechu to use alcohol. Perplexed, Yechu inquired about her intention. Lily clarified that the hides of the transformed fish were susceptible to liquor. She'd witnessed someone use spirits to repel them previously, yet you urgently requested Jang to hasten and procure the alcohol. However, Jang had already commenced eliminating them, assuring Yechu not to yell, as there were plenty of bottles available. They began lobbing liquor toward the altered fish one after the other. But with such a swarm, it wasn't proving very effective, grasping that there were far too many mutated fish, and not ample alcohol to discourage them. Zhang instructed Yechu to quit squandering bullets and suggested they flee. Zhang and Lily started taking down the obstructions they positioned against the doorway. To secure it, however, when Zhang unlocked the portal, he saw something that startled him. Actually, Zhang was startled to see Yechu being pursued by transformed fish, but somehow Yeta managed to evade them and burst from the room. He swiftly barricaded the door with anything he could discover. Zhang yelled to Yetu, imploring him to head towards the stairwell, for this was their opportunity to escape to the top and formulate a strategy. The altered fish were relentlessly attempting to break free from the room. Lily and the others commenced sprinting toward the roof. To their astonishment, a mutated fish appeared from above and pounced on Lily. In a reflex action to safeguard her, John stepped in between them, risking his own well-being. During the skirmish, John's hand was severed by the mutated fish, but he succeeded in vanquishing it in spite of that. Guaranteeing Lily's security, blood streamed from John's hand, causing Lily to become terrified. However, John assured her that he was unharmed and implored her to proceed upstairs and unlock the door to the roof. He also summoned Yetu to hasten. As Yeta darted towards the rooftop, he abruptly sensed someone tugging him backward. Spinning around, he realized that someone was being enveloped by the form of a changed fish. Startled, Yetu discerned it was actually that individual who had latched onto him from the rear. Attempting to restrain him when Yetu glanced back, he recognized that the person was Mark, begging for Yetu to rescue him. However, Yetu realized that the transformed fish were closing in on them, and even John urged him to disregard Mark as they were in immediate jeopardy. With no other recourse, Yetu abandoned the bag with Mark and hastily sprinted away to safety. Meanwhile, Lily arrived at the highest floor and endeavored to open the door, but she struggled to do so. To her surprise, the door swung open from the reverse side, causing Lily to stumble and crash to the floor. As she gazed up, she perceived a man clutching a shotgun in his hand. Simultaneously, on the other flank, Ye Chehung was fiercely gunning down the mutated fish that were chasing them. There the man inquired with Zhang about his injury. But to their shock, not only were transformed fish emerging from below, but some also manifested from the stairs above. Witnessing this, Yetu anxiously cried out at Zhang to be wary, as a fish was poised to attack him. The instant John looked up, he observed the fish already leaping toward him for the strike, so he instinctively covered his face for safeguarding. However, to their amazement, they discerned the sound of a firearm unlike the pistol. When John opened his eyes, he realized that the transformed fish had been killed. As they pivoted towards the origin of the sound, they were surprised to see Lily with a man wielding a shotgun. Both Jung and Yetu speculated about the identity of the man. Lee was also anxious and disclosed that they were in a difficult predicament, as the entire edifice had been overwhelmed by mutated fish. Now they confront the challenge of figuring out how to move forward, with unfamiliar individuals in their presence, and uncertainty about the quantity of mutated fish in the structure. They need to conceive a scheme to handle the circumstances. The narrative commenced with the central character, a fellow named Yetu. He spoke of fish, creatures familiar to all as living beings. He also conveyed that if one were to explore the chronicles of biology, then fish possessed an astounding rate of procreation, with a multitude of distinct varieties, spanning from the olden times to the here and now. It was also brought up that perhaps humankind only perceived fish as victuals, and anybody could easily dispatch them, because they lacked the potency to push back. Yetu then revealed he had personally encountered such a hair-raising episode. Let's investigate the precise tale of what transpired with Yetu. The setting shifts to the metropolis of Wuchuan at 5 p.m. in the afternoon, where we encounter the main character, Yetu, a recent alumnus who had journeyed to Wuyuan City in pursuit of employment. In a humble solitary room to rent, actually, the quandary was that upon entering the workforce, he was short on funds, and his sole recourse was to secure lodgings within the Wuyuan area. He also noted that the populace dwelling there possessed questionable histories, and many were reluctant to socialize with them. So until he obtained a legitimate occupation, he could only put up with the hardship of a rented room. One eve, the rain poured down relentlessly, causing him to feel anxious because he had a job interview the subsequent day. He hoped that the tempest wouldn't impede his interview. So, despite the downpour, he managed to drift off to sleep by morning. While he was slumbering, he felt a peculiar sensation of moisture on his leg, which mystified him, leading him to rouse. The instant he peeled open his eyes, he was astounded to witness his room submerged in water. It was a deluge, yet, he pondered whether the inundation was triggered by the showers from the preceding night. Abruptly, he spotted something within the water, and was taken aback to see fish with visages akin to humans meandering in the water. He speculated how this could possibly occur. To his even greater surprise, the fish materialized from the water and pounced upon him. Somehow he averted the assault, but in the course, he himself tumbled into the water. As he struggled, other fish within the water commenced gnawing on his hand. Nonetheless, he managed to shake them off. Despite this, the large fish persisted in their attempts to attack him. So, he rapidly exited the room and secured the door from the exterior. Shaken and puzzled, he questioned what was befalling him in this realm. However, when he glanced outside, he was stunned to discern a multitude of deceased bodies drifting in the water. It appeared as though the fish had decimated them. Overcome with shock, he wrestled to interpret the situation. Suddenly, from out of the blue, a girl named Qin Xiao yelled at him to be vigilant, warning him that those fish with human countenances would devour them. However, he remained immobile, rooted in a spot. Xiao urged him anew to vacate that place and ascend to higher terrain for safety. Yetu was so startled that he couldn't budge in the least. But when he observed the fish launching an assault on him, he fled in order to survive. even though Xiao cried out at him to flee or he would perish. When they arrived at the stairway, where water wasn't coursing, Xiao revealed they were secure for a span of time, since the fish wouldn't have the capacity to move without water. Perplexed, Yechu inquired what those entities were. However, the girl was taken aback to notice blood emanating from his hand, indicating he was wounded. Yechu assured her to remain calm, explaining it was merely a scratch and not serious. He then inquired again regarding those peculiar fish cadavers and what was unfolding there. Xiao responded that she wasn't certain because when she awoke, it was already like that. She also mentioned that there were not just numerous deaths, but an abundance of fish with human-like faces in the water as well. She then proposed they head to the rooftop, as everyone was seeking sanctuary up there. The scene then transitioned to the rooftop, where scores of people were perched on every building's rooftop. Yechu was surprised to see that everyone was there, even the individuals with dubious pasts. As Yechu moved toward the railing to survey the area, he was astounded to observe that the entire city was flooded. After a stretch, government representatives arrived by helicopter and declared that Wuyuan City was in a state of calamity. They urged everyone to exercise patience and wait for the rescue squad in the interim. They advised not to come into contact with the water and to properly secure windows at night. While awaiting more guidance, they reiterated the caution against touching the water, and then the helicopter departed the vicinity. An elderly man queried an individual known as Old Zhang whether he believed the fish and the flood were linked. Zhang responded that he was unsure, but numerous people had perished that morning, and it was dreadful. Suddenly, someone shouted and instructed them to hasten, as someone required their assistance. Upon hearing this, Yechu hurried toward the railing and discovered a boy clinging to a window of the top floor. Below the rooftop, the boy begged for them to assist in pulling him up, as he was nearing the end of his grip. Yechu called out to Xiao to search for some ropes. As the boy began to lose his grasp and the fish attacked him, he entreated them to rescue him. By the time Xiao appeared and disclosed that they had rummaged through her uncle's quarters, but there was no rope to be found yet. Yechu then asked the shady lads if they had any ropes. One of the disreputable youths reacted by taunting the boy, hanging there, asserting it was such a brief distance he could ascend by himself. Hearing this, Yechu was taken aback and shouted at them, expressing disbelief that people were in peril, and they were still making jest of it. Suddenly, the dangling boy howled in anguish, causing them to scramble back to sea. It was a frightening moment for everyone, as the fish now had hands gripping onto his leg and pulling him into the water. The lads cried out for them to aid. As the strange monster abruptly developed hands, Old Zhang then discarded his shirt and requested Yechu to hand over his shirt as well. Yechu concurred, realizing they had no other alternative. Zhang tied the shirts together, and they poured water on it to strengthen the joint. They then dropped it in the air for the boy to clutch, so they could hoist him up. However, when he shifted his hand to grasp the makeshift rope, his grip loosened a bit at that instant. The fish gained the upper hand and pulled with more vigor. This time, the boy relinquished his grasp with his legs as well, and he fell into the water. At that moment, the boy commenced howling in agony as the fish began to assault him. Observing this, the people on the roof became anxious. Xiao was petrified by the vista. Old Zhang then voiced his belief that there was no sanctuary in a place where there was no water. So Zhang instructed everyone to promptly retreat to their respective rooms and secure all windows and doors tightly. Everyone initiated sprinting towards their rooms. Witnessing this, Yechu realized that his room was already occupied by the fish. Fortunately for Yechu, Zhang asked him not to fret, as he knew Yechu resided one floor below him, so Yechu could take shelter in his room. Zhang also suggested that Xiao move in with them too, as it would be simpler for them to look out for each other. Xiao assented to Zhang's proposition. Then they descended to Old Zhang's room. In an abrupt turn of affairs, three individuals who had no acquaintance with one another, a part-time worker girl, Xiao, a retired combatant, Old Zhang, and the main character, Yechu, a graduate, needed to rely on each other for the rest of the time, until the rescue team arrived. Subsequently, all three came together and arranged the room, investigating the food provisions and resources they possessed. Despite the hardships, they somehow managed to pull through the first night in the room. Yechu asked Xiao to eat something, knowing they still had to endure the current situation for some days. But Xiao responded that she was fine, as she had just consumed a meal a while ago. Yechu then remarked that no one had anticipated such a calamity to happen. He conveyed that he was scheduled to attend a couple of interviews that day, he also articulated his unease, noting that they were unsure if the rescue squads would even arrive. She somberly responded in the affirmative, observing that there was no signal on her mobile, so she couldn't notify her folks that she was secure. Jang also commented that it was peculiar. They hadn't yet spotted the recovery unit, as it was quite unusual and the quiet devoid of water was unsettling. Abruptly, they picked up the strange vocalizations of fish beyond the door and panicked, questioning what could be lurking outside at the entrance. Old Jung then requested them to maintain quiet. Subsequently, Jung attempted to press his ear against the door to discern the sounds on the opposite side. Yet you inquired if it might be those transformed fish. Ascending the steps, John countered with a negative, as it didn't appear so, since the sounds originated from upstairs. Jing then disclosed that they were on the second level. On the third story resided Old Joe and those kids, asserting this. He suddenly detected someone yelling at someone to get lost. Upon hearing this, John grew tense and conveyed that it was Old Joe's voice. Jang suspected the fair-haired kid must have been causing a ruckus. For Joe, he then informed Yechu and Xiao that he would venture up and investigate by himself. He even instructed them to remain indoors, as he would go up and return swiftly after checking. Yechu even tried to dissuade Jang from going, but it was too late by the time he asked him to hold back. Zeng had already shut the door. Xiao then urged Yechu to dismiss it, as it was a neighborly disagreement, so it was preferable for them not to get involved. The scene then transitioned to an hour afterward, where both Xiao and Yechu were awaiting Zhong's return. Yet Chu displayed apprehension, wondering that it had been a while. Yet still Master John hadn't come back. Xiao proposed that perhaps the matter was settled, and Old John was conversing with Old Joe. Yet Chu then stood up and declared that he sensed something amiss, so he would go up and examine. He also asked her to remain inside, as he would return soon. Xiao then inquired whether they could proceed together and see what was transpiring. Yet you anxiously requested her not to go, as there was no necessity. Because what if they encountered those transformed fish that could emerge from the water? Hearing this, Xiao cautioned him not to underestimate the girls, as perhaps when he found himself in peril, who knew who would be saving whom? She then began preparing by obtaining a stick and securing a ruler and knife to it, to fashion it into a defensive weapon. After readying it, she handed the stick to Yi Chu and asked him to grip it properly, as despite its simplicity, it shouldn't be a problem when used for personal protection. Witnessing this, Yet you also grew impressed. Then they both cautiously unlatched the gate and ventured outside with a flashlight to observe the situation. But upon exiting, there was a profound quiet in the stairwell. Yetu then stated, the unnerving silence in the stairwell corridor made her fearful when she recalled that there were transformed fish downstairs. Yeta then once more instructed her to follow him and carefully watch her step. Slowly they advanced toward the floor above, and after moving a bit further, Yeta discovered a Swiss Army knife on the steps. Xiao questioned in bewilderment what he had found, to which he responded that seeing the army knife lying there, he felt puzzled as he had no notion whose knife it could be. So he asked Xiao to retain it as they might find a use for it later. Suddenly, he got astonished and stated that he also noticed something on the wall. When he concentrated on that location with the flashlight, they were alarmed to observe that it was blood on the wall. Yeta then wondered where it had originated and asked Xiao if she had witnessed it prior. Xiao responded that she was unaware, as she had been occupied with managing some articles. She then inquired whether it could be the injuries of that individual during the altercation above. As they proceeded, they observed more blood on the stair's surface. Seeing this, Yeta commented that he believed it was certainly not from an injured person. Xiao then took some blood onto the knife and inspected it carefully. Yeta then added that he thought the scenario was suspicious. Master John took a lengthy period and hadn't returned, and now there was a trail of blood. He then anxiously asked Xiao to hasten and go up, as he felt something was occurring, and those transformed fish definitely ambushed individuals, so Master John could be in danger. But Xiao held his hand and implored him to calm down and not get worked up, as she was assessing the circumstances, and it could certainly be different from his assumptions. She then declared that she believed the blood was sprayed onto the stairwell, intentionally, as if there was really someone injured. Then there should be a trail of blood throughout the vicinity, and even if it was so close to their room, yet they never picked up a cry for help. Abruptly, a new kind of beast manifested in the scene behind them, yet you repeated that it was too late. So who would spray blood on the stairway? Shai responded that it could simply be that fair-haired kid acting out, as he had engaged in disgusting acts before. She also added that she thought the fair-haired young man had dropped the knife there. Yet Chu countered that he didn't concern himself with that thug. Maybe it was like she said yet. Chu then asked her if they should go upstairs and search for Master Jiang. As he was ascending more stairs, he sensed something slippery at the border of the steps. When he inspected with the flashlight, it was someone's spit, but he perceived it as water and questioned where it had come from, as it looked like it had originated from above, dripping down suddenly. Yet you discerned that there was something at the summit of the stairs. When he aimed the flashlight toward it, they were stunned to witness that it was a more transformed iteration of fish, with 2 legs and 4 arms. Watching yet, you grew anxious as the transformed fish had left the water and moved onto land. But still, the fish didn't attack them, which confused everyone. It was peculiar that the fish displayed no aggression toward them at all. To investigate, he employed his stick to move the fish aside. The moment the stick brushed against the transformed fish's whisker, it sprung into action and lunged toward them. They were startled by the abrupt assault, but still employed the stick to fend themselves. To their amazement, the fish utilized its arms to walk on the ground. It even wielded the stick as a weapon, striking back with surprising might. Yechu was nearly knocked to the floor by the strength of the blow, but Xiao managed to seize his hand just in the nick of time, preventing him from falling. After being rescued, he lay on the stairs, but soon the fish got perilously near, opening its jaws as if to devour him. Before it could strike, Xiao assailed the fish with the stick, sending it hurtling through the air with the impact of the hit. Anxiously, Xiao inquired of Yechu whether he was all right or had been injured. Yechu responded affirmatively, and jokingly commented that the one who rescued whom was mixed up. Taking the stick from her, Yechu advanced to attack the fish. But instantaneously, the fish darted away from its position and started to run. As the fish evaded his blow, Yechu missed and commenced shouting at it to wait and not hide. Disregarding the caution, he began to pursue the fish, but Xiao urged him to halt, cautioning that they had no idea if more transformed fish were on the way. Yet you urged Xiao to hurry, and proposed they go upstairs to locate Master Jiang. Sensing that something might have befallen him, they dashed toward the 3rd floor, and upon entering, they were horrified to see a larger and more menacing transformed fish awaiting them. This time it was akin to encountering a horse or elephant-sized fish, with lengthy tail, legs, and arms. Behind it they observed a person. Bewildered Xiao inquired who was on the floor. Yet Chu responded that it must be the fair-haired kid she had mentioned earlier. However, it turned out to be Master Zhang, who was slowly approaching the transformed fish from behind. With a rapid move, John grappled the fish and commenced stabbing it with a knife. He then shouted at Yetu to seize the opportunity and extract old Joe from the room. Anxiously, Yetu inquired about Master Jiang's condition. John focused on the urgency of the situation, instructed them to proceed and aid old Joe first as his leg had been bitten off. Agreeing, they hastened into the room to discover old Joe seated inside. Joe reassured them not to shout, identifying them as the residents residing 1 level beneath. Yechu and Xiao were startled to witness old Joe's limb, severed cleanly in half by the aquatic beast. Yechu inquired, bewildered, about the mishap to his leg and how the transformed fish had infiltrated the room. Joe clarified that the awareness of those altered fish was petrifying. They ascended using the nearby power poles. Yetu remarked that the changed fish looked distinct from the initial day. They stumbled upon them, observing that the fish lacked eyes. Joe concurred, adding that he had also noticed that the altered fish didn't depend on their vision to explore their surroundings. He further conveyed that he and old John, after barely escaping peril, had been concealing themselves without daring to make a peep. Nevertheless, their rise had created a din, which diverted the focus of the transformed fish. Xiao indicated that old Jiang had been gone a while, prompting their anxiety, so they went to seek him. Yetu added that they discovered the stairway passage, covered in blood on the walls. Upon hearing this, old Joe proposed that it was likely the fish's doing. When twilight approached, he noticed some creatures displaying a similar conduct, and pondered if they were demarcating their realms in such fashion. Yet you, feeling strained, exclaimed in disbelief, "Territory marking indeed old." Joe countered that he was unsure regarding the fish's purposes. He advised they vacate the area for the moment and delve into it later. As they were departing, Jane came flying towards them, prompting them to come to a halt. Jane shared that despite not knowing the origin of the altered fish, they still seemed intent on assaulting and consuming them. The changed fish roared and charged toward Zhang once more, but Zhang retaliated using a fractured table as a makeshift tool. However, the transformed fish showed itself to be remarkably robust, and Zhang struggled to maintain his ground against it. Old Zhou instructed Xiao and Yechu to stay put, while he diverted the attention of the altered fish. He urged them to concentrate on taking Old Zhang with them, stressing that they didn't need to endanger their lives to save an old, handicapped man like himself. Yetu responded to Zhou, urging him not to surrender as they wouldn't abandon him. Furthermore, she pointed out that merely confining the altered fish wouldn't grant them a feeling of security. As Yetu rummaged through his shirt for something to use as a weapon, he discovered nothing of value at all. He also observed that the previous blade they possessed was still embedded in the skull of the altered fish, though there were containers in the area. Yet you deemed them ineffective, as shattering one would render it useless. After merely one impact against the transformed fish, seeking assistance, Xiao located something and asked him to examine it. It was the lumber employed to affix the knife, with sharpened edges that could serve as a weapon. She proposed that while it may not penetrate the skin, it could prove valuable, attacking via the mouth and piercing through the fish's mind. Yet Chu favored the concept, so he grabbed the wooden stick and asked Xiao to watch over Old Zhou. Meanwhile, Zhang persisted in fighting the altered fish, but he started to weaken in the face of the fish's overwhelming force. As Jung found himself vulnerable, the fish attempted to assault him. But fortunately, Yechu arrived in the nick of time, thrusting the stick into the mouth of the transformed fish. However, the fish maintained a firm hold on the stick. Now both Zhang and Yechu collaborated, pushing with all their might to drive the stick deeper. Even with the combined power of Yichu and Zhang, they struggled to overpower the altered fish. Suddenly, the fish began shoving them back, prompting Xiao to join in and aid Yichu, while Old Zhou offered his backing to Zhang. With their unified strength, they succeeded in conquering the beast. Following this, they breathed a sigh of relief, but the feeling of danger persisted. Yet Chu vocalized his wonder about the origin of the mutated fish monster. Jing speculated that it might be associated with the city deluge, as they hadn't encountered any other updates that could account for its presence. Old Zhang then directed Yet Chu to organize the medical equipment, gather further alcohol and bandages. He also instructed Xiao to fetch all the liquid containers and edibles from the cabinets in the space. As they both initiated their respective tasks, Ichu questioned Old Zhou about what had transpired at the staircase previously. Zhou elucidated that he had been feeling uninspired, so he decided to view a Chinese theatrical on his mobile. However, those two slime balls couldn't endure it. Thus, they opted to provoke a brawl with him. While they were tussling, the transformed monster shattered through the window and waylaid them. Zhang guessed that the clamor might have lured the monster, as it could be utilizing echolocation for movement, as they were gathering everything. Abruptly, a young lad named Mark showed up, and upon seeing the deceased beast, inquired with surprise if they had truly succeeded in vanquishing it. Mark then began looking for his companion, calling out his name before noticing his friend's cold remains. He was in shock. Mark yelled, laying blame on Old Zhou for the tragedy, asserting that his choice to heed some lousy music had summoned the aquatic monster. He also berated Jung, charging him with intentionally not rescuing Chun because of their past quarrels. Upon hearing this, Jung stood up and struck Mark in the face, ordering him to be quiet. He then questioned Mark's whereabouts during the creature's assault. If he was so valiant during the conflict, Mark responded defensively, asking if there was something wrong with merely seeking to endure. Old Zhang furiously lashed out at Mark, stressing that regardless of whatever animosities they may harbor, if Mark desires to survive, there must be respect between them and no causing of problems. He released Mark's shirt collar and instructed him to retire to his room, collect all useful objects, and then return. Yetu then started to contemplate their existing predicament, declaring that it was more than they anticipated, as anyone could find themselves within the belly of the transformed fish. In a split second, she emphasized that all they could do was join forces with one another, even if the other person might be someone they had no liking for. He mentioned that afterward, they obstructed the lower staircase to avert more altered fish from climbing up, and reinforced every access point. After placing the wounded Old Zhou on the bed and finishing all the essential duties, It was now midnight. Most individuals drifted off to sleep, attempting to set aside the incident involving the changed fish to the farthest corners of their minds. The scene then transitioned to the following morn, where everyone was still slumbering. Suddenly, yet you detected the sound of splashing, as if somebody was swimming in the water. As he opened the window to have a look, he was stunned to witness a multitude of fish swimming in the water below, just like Yechu. Another person from the opposite structure was observing them, but all of a sudden, for reasons unclear, that individual opened the window. The instant it opened, all the fish hordes surged towards it and clambered up into the building. After that, the lad was howling in anguish. Observing this, Yetu became terrified and shut the curtain out of fear. The abrupt change in Yetu's demeanor made Young anxious, so he queried Yetu about what had occurred. Yetu responded requesting him to be silent. So Jing ran toward the window to observe, and when he looked, he too became afraid. Jing then asked Yetu to locate some masking tape to secure the windows. Gradually, they sealed the window with tape so the fish couldn't penetrate. Jing then informed everyone that the mutated fish had already attacked the survivors in the opposite edifice for their individual protection. He instructed them not to approach the windows. Zhang inquired of Xiao about the ration allocations, asking about the food provisions. Xiao responded that, along with the food supplies from Old Joe and Mark, they had adequate sustenance for 10 days. However, the biggest challenge was pure water, as they did not have enough. According to her estimation, they could only survive for 1 week. Jing then clarified that based on their plan, they had a week to wait for the rescue team to arrive. Mark, with a confused and peeved expression, asked why there was a water shortage when the entire city was flooded. Jing